We have a crisis in student loans today. Almost 2 million Canadians owe over $18 billion to the Canada Student Loans Program, and the numbers keep rising, and 1 in 6 insolvencies involve student loans, the highest number ever. Why should you care? Because this impacts every student, every parent, and every taxpayer. What's the solution? We've got some ideas starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Here on Debt Free in 30, we all have a topic that gets us riled up. Scott Theriault is not a big fan of HELOCs. I can get Ted Michalos all riled up by talking about payday loans, and I will later in this episode. And for me, I get upset when we talk about student loans. So Ted, welcome to season number 6 of Debt Free in 30. Are you ready to get me all riled up?
Looking forward to it.
I know you would be. The problems with student loans are not a new topic for us. I'm sure you remember 11 years ago.
Was it that long ago?
Oh, yes. We were young men back then, back in 2008, in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yes, I remember
that. Yes, all of the planes were canceled. We had to go to Ottawa to testify before the Senate Standing Committee on Banking, Trade, and Commerce. And because the planes were shut down, you said, hey, no problem, I'll drive. So in the middle of the night, and I remember your strategy for driving, it was put the left wheel on the rumble strip, and that way you know you're within 2 feet of the guardrail and everything's good. So we blasted our way to Ottawa and testified. Now at the time, back in 2008, there was a 10-year rule, and the government had changed it to a 7-year rule, and we were advocating for a shorter rule.
Correct. And
we didn't get our way, as I recall. But we fought anyway. So let's start with the current state of the law. What is the 7-year rule? What am I talking about there?
So student loans are not dischargeable under bankruptcy or proposal unless you have been out of school for 7 years. So that means the last day you were registered as a student at a post-secondary institution, that's the 7-year rule. The date starts from that date.
So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you had to graduate. Doesn't mean, so if you stopped going to school in the middle of the semester, if they kept you registered to the last day, that's the day that the 7 years starts.
And the way you can find out is you contact OSAP or Canada Student Loans and ask them what's my end of study.
Yeah, the National Student Loan Center is in Mississauga. The number's easily obtainable off the internet.
And they, or give us a call. We'll tell you where it is.
That's right.
Okay, so here's the problem. Every year we crunch the numbers and look at everyone who's filed a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy with us here at Hoyes and Michalos, and the numbers are scary. Let me give you some scary numbers. 1 in 6 personal insolvencies involve student loans, and it's increasing. So that's like 18% now. It was just 13% 7 years ago. Our average client with a student loan owes almost $15,000 in student loans at the time they file a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy with us, but they also owe money on personal loans, credit cards, taxes, and other loans, like payday loans. We'll get to that. So their total debt is over $46,000 when they file. So, Ted, why is it that former students have so much debt?
Well, the single biggest cost is that tuition costs are, single biggest reason tuition costs are just going up at a ridiculous rate. It's averaged over 5% per year for the last decade. I think inflation for that period has probably averaged 1 or 1.5% per year. So I don't understand why it's going up so much faster. On top of that, I'm just getting started here.
Okay.
The graduates that are coming out with these debt loads aren't necessarily finding work right away. Well, we know about this. What do they call it? Is it the gig?
The gig economy,
right.
Yes.
So you get a temporary job, you get a contract position, maybe you work in 3 jobs. You just aren't generating the income that you thought you were going to get from this education. And because you're graduating with more debt in the first place, it's a heavier burden just to begin with.
Yeah, so you're not getting the return on investment that you had hoped for from your educational investment. So, and I think that's obviously a huge problem. So from when you're very young, I mean, maybe this doesn't apply to you and me because that was a long time ago.
Because we're not very young anymore.
But you know, parents today, they're telling their kids from a very young age, you know, you're going to college, you're going to university. That's what you're doing. So by the time you get to grade 8, so you're, 12, 13 years old, it's like, okay, I got to make sure I'm picking my courses for high school so that it leads to university. By the time you get to grade 12, so now you're 16, 17, 18 years old, I'm selecting where I'm going to go to university. And then I finally get accepted. Fantastic. That's great. And that's when the reality hits. Oh, my goodness.
How am I going to pay for this?
How am I going to pay for this? $9,000 a year in tuition. And of course, when we're talking about Ontario universities here, obviously it's different in other places, but that's just the tuition.
Right. That doesn't include books. It doesn't include your computer. It doesn't include your room and board. You got to eat.
Yeah, so it's quite conceivable if you're away from home that it's $20,000 a year.
Easily.
And if you're into a program, one of the science programs, you're going to be a doctor, a nurse, engineering, well, then your costs are way higher than even that.
Well, and we keep using universities as the example, but you have these same costs with colleges. So the tuition is lower, but you still have the same living expenses, books and materials. The program may be shorter, but you're still, most of those students are borrowing too. Yeah,
and so unless your parents are paying for it all,
which would be nice.
Which would be great. Or unless you get a full scholarship, which is not, sure, you're going to get some kind of grants perhaps, but to get a full scholarship that's paying all your living expenses and tuition and everything, highly unusual.
Right.
So what choice do you have as a student? Well, you got to get a loan. Like there is no other choice. And we know from the stats that 40% of post-secondary students get a loan, whether it's a government loan or otherwise, and it's 50% for university undergraduates. So half the kids in university have a loan.
Borrowing money to be there.
Borrowing money to be there. And we know that this debt lingers. Only 34%. I mean, this is an actual stat. We actually looked this up. About a third of graduates, we're talking graduates with a bachelor's degree, have their loans fully paid off after 3 years. Well, I guess that means 2/3 of them are still carrying debt after more than 3 years.
And that's 2/3 of 50%.
Yeah, these are huge numbers.
Right.
Students typically take, and this is right on the Ontario government's website, typically take 9.5 years to pay off their student loans in full here in Ontario. 9.5 years. In 2010, average undergraduates completed university with an average debt of about $26,000. But if they supplemented government student debt with a student credit card, bank loan, or student line of credit, the debt was more like $44,000.
Well, and the stat you used for us, the average insolvent student loan carrier is $46,000.
Yeah, so this matches exactly with what we're seeing in our numbers.
Right.
So when someone files with us, they owe $15,000 in student loans, but you're right, $12,000 in personal loans, $9,000 in credit cards, $4,000 in taxes. We're talking about the average student, and $6,000 in other debt. And guess what's included in that other debt? Payday loan.
Oh, you had to bring that up, didn't you?
So since you are the payday loan guy here, and you're a big supporter of the industry, I know, why is it that a student who has student loans and credit cards and everything else resorts to payday loans?
Well,
see, I knew I'd get you riled up. I knew I would.
All right. So the only time anybody uses a payday loan is because they can't make ends meet. They are short cash, and these guys make it so easy to get a loan. Their hours are better. Their locations are convenient. They're friendly. They're helpful. They want to give you that loan, and then once you get it, you're stuck. I mean, the average person who's applying for a payday loan, that one of our clients, makes $2,400 a month. They're using payday loans to either pay other payday loans, which is the real trap, or they're using it for basic living expenses. They're not using it because they want to go out and have fun with their friends. They're using it because they got to pay the rent, they got to buy food, they got to put gas in the car. 45% of student loan debtors have at least one payday loan, at least one. And that's uncommon. Most of them it's 2, 3, 4.
Well, in fact, yes, 4.
Yep.
So almost half of people who have student loans also have
a payday loan.
Yeah, and they generally have 4 of them, not one of them.
Right.
So it's a massive problem. And you're right, you're maxed out on everything else. And so
and so those 4 payday loans, that's $4,500 worth of debt at 350% interest.
Yeah. 390%. So
is that what it is now?
It's $15 on 100, 26 times, it'd be 390%. So it's these are massive numbers. So okay, we threw a lot of numbers at. We love numbers. We're accountants here. We love the numbers. It's what we do. Why should people who are watching this care?
Because student loan debt impacts everybody. It's not just the person that borrows the money. It's also their parents, because if the student can't deal with it, the parents are going to rely on their parents for some portion of it. It's going to be future employers because they're stressed. It's going to be taxpayers because if they don't pay it back, that means the taxpayers are footing the bill. So everyone in the Canadian society is impacted by this student loan crisis. It's not just the kids borrowing the money.
Yep, I agree. It doesn't matter if you're not a student.
Right. And we're talking about $18.2 billion.
Yeah.
$billion.
And that's the Canada Student Loan Program portfolio as of 2016, 2017.
So that's not OSAP or all the provincial ones?
No, that's just Canada. So
and it's 1.7 million borrowers.
Yeah, as of 2 years ago. So the numbers are massive. And yeah, if you throw in OSAP and all the provincial loans, and it's typically about a 60-40 split federal provincial, and then you throw in all the student loans that are provided by private institutions, then I don't know, what are we at, 50 billion? I mean,
it'd be a huge number.
Huge numbers. So Now, some of the candidates in next year's U.S. presidential election,
Some of them.
I'm not going to mention names because we're not U.S. here, but
Right.
some of them are saying, hey, you know what we should do? We should just forgive student loans. We should just get rid of them entirely. Okay, that would be a possible solution to this issue. You know, what do you think? Good idea, bad idea? Where there's some downsides we're missing here?
Well, so how do you decide? Is it just anyone who has a student loan as of today's date, do you give it back? What about the people that pay back their student loans 2 years ago? Or what about the people that are going to go to school 2 years from now? Like, how do you decide who's going to qualify for this? And then who's actually going to foot the bill for it? I guess the average taxpayer in the U.S.? They've already got a deficit, so I guess they're just adding to the deficit. Is that the plan?
Tack it all on. Yeah, I mean,
which means the rest of us are paying for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's not politically viable because if there are a couple of million people right now who have a student loan, that means there must be, I don't know, 10 million people who used to have one that paid it off.
If it's 1.7 million Canadians with Canada student loans, let's make it simple. That means it's 20 million Americans.
Yeah, and so if you're the one who took a part-time job while you were working or while you were in school. Maybe you took university over a 6-year period so you could work and pay a big chunk of it yourself. And now the other people are getting theirs written off. Well, you probably aren't going to be happy with that. So my guess is that whether it's a good idea or not, I'm not going to debate it, but it's probably not politically viable. I can't see everyone going with it. Now, one of my other big frustrations with student loans is the government keeps changing the rules.
Oh, geez, yes, every year.
Every year. So 2016, 2017, so 2 school years ago, there was about $1 billion in OSAP. 60% of it was grants, 40% of it was loans. Okay. Wynne became the premier in 2017. I mean, she waited 2013. She waited 4 years. Then prior to the election announced that starting in September 2017, free tuition. That wasn't really free tuition. What she announced was that if you had a family income of $50,000 or less, you'd get tuition grants of around $8,700. Well, we already figured out that the average tuition's around $9,000. So, okay, free tuition. 2017, 2018, OSAP was $1.7 billion. Only $200 million of it was loans. $1.5 billion was grants. So the last year of the Wynne government, they made it grants.
Vote for us.
Vote for us. Vote for us. And again, I'm not debating whether the policy is right or wrong. I'm just saying that we went from a heavy loan program to a heavy grant program. Then, of course, that new guy whose name I can't remember got elected. I think he's got the same name as me, actually.
His name is John?
Yeah, that's what it is. So Dougie became the premier. He cut tuition by 10% and made some fees optional. Okay, I guess that's a good thing. But he eliminated grants for high-income students, however you want to define that. And he also eliminated the 6-month interest-free grace period after graduation. So with both the federal and the provincial loans, you don't have to start paying for 6 months.
But you didn't have to.
No, you still don't have to, but the interest starts immediately with the provincial, even though the interest doesn't start with the federal. So the point is, if I'm a student, how do I know what the rules are going to be next year? Is it going to be loans? Is it going to be grants? Is it going to be an interest-free period or what? Kind of hard to be planning for the future.
And we get all sorts of clients that complain because the credit card companies seem to change their interest rates whenever the hell they want and they can't do anything about it. This is worse. Much bigger numbers, and it's a much bigger adversary, so to speak.
Well, and so since we're ranting here, let's do some math. So $18.2 billion is the Canada student loans portfolio as of 2 years ago. They're putting loans on at a rate of about $2.5 billion a year. Obviously, some of them are getting paid off. So let's assume that after September of this year, the new school year, it's $20 billion. Okay. The federal student loan interest rate is prime plus 2.5%.
Bank prime?
Bank of Canada Prime. So, and again, people can fact check me, and if I'm wrong on this, I'm sure you'll tell me on Twitter that I'm totally out to lunch here. But I believe the Bank of Canada Prime, as we are recording this, is around 3.95%. So let's say 4%. You add 2.5% to that, and you get 6.5%. T-bill rate. So what the government can borrow at right now, long bonds are around 1.4, 1.5, 1.6%. Let's call it 1.5%. So what is the margin that the federal government is earning on student loans? Well,
5%.
5%. 6.5 minus 1.5. And how much is 5% of $20 billion?
Gee, I don't know.
Let's do the math. Carry the zero. That would be $1 billion. So $1 billion a year in contribution is being contributed by the Canada Student Loans Program. Now, the last numbers I saw said that the government wrote off about 200 million of loans last year. Okay, so that puts us down to 800 million. And obviously they've got some costs. They got people who have to fill out forms and paperwork and whatnot. But it seems to me, and again, correct my thinking here if I'm wrong, but Canada Student Loans is actually a profit center for the government.
Unless they're using that profit to fund the grants that they're giving out. But we don't know any of that.
Well, and the grants are much more common at the provincial level than the federal level. So, I mean, you asked the question earlier and alluded to why is it that tuition is $9,000 a year now when that's certainly been increasing at higher than the rate of inflation. I don't know the answer to that, but there's obviously something going on somewhere. Okay, so enough about the numbers. I said we weren't going to talk numbers, and then I talked even more numbers. Let's talk about solutions. So, and I want to get back to that discussion we were having about ROI, return on investment. Going to school is an investment decision.
Should be an investment decision.
Okay,
I don't believe that it is. Going to school for most kids is an entitlement. That's just the expectation they're going to go to school.
Well, like we said, your parents have been telling you all along, you're going, so you're going. It should be a well thought out decision, though. So, okay, I'm 18 years old and I've got a choice. I can go to university. It's going to cost me $20,000 a year for the next 4 years plus 4 years of my life. And I'm going to graduate with a bunch of student loan debt, probably. Or I could just start working. Maybe I'll lease a truck. I'll buy some tools. I'll finance some tools. I'll get a bank loan to help start up my, construction business or whatever. Now, if my construction business, and I'm just using that as an example, it could be anything, my daycare center, my IT, whatever, doesn't go well, I have the ability to get debt relief. I can surrender the truck. I can then, file a bankruptcy or a proposal or whatever. If my student experience doesn't work out well, I don't have that option for 7 years. That seems inconsistent to me.
Well, from a financial perspective, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It doesn't make any sense. Now, why is it that, I use the example of my student experience didn't work out. So what can happen to someone that would cause them not to finish school or
any number of things could happen to somebody so they couldn't finish school. Maybe there was an issue with someone in their family. Parents separate, one of them dies, and they can't finish school because they've got to go help look after the rest of the family. Or they themselves get some sort of illness or sickness. Or they discover that, this really isn't the right place for me. I'm not taking advantage of it. I'm not going to finish, and it's not going to get me anywhere. There are lots of reasons why people don't finish school.
Yeah, and it's very common. The dropout rate in university is 16%, and it's 25% in college. The 3-year default rate on student loans is 9%. So if you drop out of school, you've still got the loan. But you don't have the degree, the qualifications to then get the good-paying job to pay you back. 12% of all direct loan borrowers, over 300,000 borrowers, are in repayment assistance plans right now. That's about a third versus...
And that's interest relief, it's deferrals, it's all sorts of stuff.
Exactly right. And so, you're starting off in the hole. And you made the comment about, taking care of a parent or, maybe it's a kid. Student loans are more of a problem for women than for men.
Oh, certainly. Our studies have always shown that the total debt held by female students that end up becoming our clients is lower than the men, but it's a higher percentage of their income. They're earning less money, and more of them have dependents.
Well, in fact, we know that you're right. 61% of student loan debtors are women. And coincidentally, they get 61% of the grants and loans, so that kind of makes sense. That's how it would work. They owe more on the student loans themselves, about 8% more, $15,000 versus $14,000. Total debt levels may be different, as you allude to. 79% of males are working 3 years after graduation versus 72% for females, often because, they might be on maternity leave, doing childcare, caring for an adult or whatnot. So student loans are a problem that disproportionately impacts females. So, solutions. I keep getting back to that. Keep me on track here.
So the simplest solution, we make student loans consistent with every other form of debt that you can incur.
And so that means no more 7-year rule.
Correct.
So And that makes perfect sense to me. So my example earlier of the guy who starts the business or the guy who goes to school, well, if the business doesn't work out, you can get debt relief.
Right.
But if school doesn't work out, you got to wait for 7 years. So the counter argument to that, if I may play devil's advocate here, is everyone watching is saying, well, wait a minute. So what's going to happen then is everyone will go to school, get a boatload of student loans, and then the day they graduate, they'll just file bankruptcy and not pay anything back.
But bankruptcy is not free. There are consequences to filing bankruptcy. First, there's the issue of what does the actual procedure cost? Well, depending on your income, you'll have to make payments based on that income. The higher your income, the more expensive it gets. If there are things that you own beyond provincial exemptions, so things that are protected under the law, they'll be seized and sold. And there's the forward-going consequence. It has an impact on your credit bureau, so your impact on your ability to borrow in the future. And there's certain occupations. If you had two candidates, one has a bankruptcy and one doesn't, you're probably going to pick the one that didn't.
So let's take the example of I went to medical school and became a doctor.
Right.
Okay, now I don't know how much doctors make. I assume it's more than minimum wage.
Some of them would argue that that's not true.
I guess with the hours they work, maybe it isn't. But let's say I'm a doctor, and let's say I start out making, I don't know, what does a doctor make? 150, 200 grand a year? I don't know. What?
So a general practitioner probably bills 400 grand. Maybe they clear 125 to 140.
Okay, so let's say 140. So that's like $10,000-$12,000 a month gross.
Yep. So they're netting 7,000.
Okay, so if I'm a single guy making $7,000 a month and I go bankrupt, is it free?
Bankruptcy will cost you roughly $2,500 a month.
$2,500 a month for how long?
For 21 months. So the bankruptcy is going to cost you, call it $55,000, rounding up a little.
So there's the reason why people aren't going to go get a student loan and then immediately go bankrupt.
Well, and just remember back, so we said the average student loan balance for somebody that files is about 15 grand. So you wouldn't pay $55,000 to clear 15. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Now, obviously, our clients who have student loans have over $40,000 in debt, but part of that is because it's been 7 years of trying to make student loan payments and survive. Mm-hmm. So for them, yes, there's a greater need perhaps to get the debt relief offered by a bankruptcy or consumer proposal.
Right.
But I think the point is that in a bankruptcy, as you said, you pay based on what your income is. If you've graduated from university and are now working, then you have income and therefore are much less likely to want to jump into a bankruptcy. It's also possible for a creditor to oppose your discharge from bankruptcy.
That's right. It doesn't happen in a lot of cases, but the creditors have the right to say, you know what? I think you're taking advantage of the system, that you have the ability to repay a portion of your debt. So we're going to go to court and we're going to say, this person should pay something additional.
Well, and you and I know, without mentioning any names, that there is one bank in particular that does a lot of student loans. They're not government student loans, but they're student loans.
Right. And they call them professional education loans.
Yeah, professional lines of credit.
Matter.
And they loan them to lawyers and doctors and whatnot. Yep. And in the event of a bankruptcy, that bank is, it's not unusual for them to go to court and say, hey, this guy's got the ability to earn more money.
Right.
So just because the 7-year rule goes away doesn't mean that everybody's instantly going to go bankrupt. In fact, we've got some precedents for this because in 1997 there was a 2-year rule which became a 10-year rule, and there was a spike in filings just before the new rules were implemented. But when you look at the numbers, okay, maybe it was a spike of around 10% or something. It was not. It's not like half the country went bankrupt. And then, of course, we saw the same thing in 2008 when the rule was reduced from 10 years to 7. There was a spike in filings, but of course, as you remember, in 2008, there was a whole bunch of other stuff going on.
Just a few things.
Recessions and credit crisis and whatnot. So the rate was going up anyway. So I think if we were to go from a 7-year rule to a 0-year rule, there would be an acceleration in some of the bankruptcies that would have happened next year or the year after.
Any that would happen in the next 7 years that have been waiting for the clock to tick out.
Theoretically.
Would accelerate the process.
But obviously, a lot of those people who are at the 5, 6, 7-year mark, it's the accumulation of debt over that 7-year period that has put them there. So, but it wouldn't, I don't think, tell me if you disagree or not, I don't think it would cause an overall increase in filings. I think it would be bringing a bunch of them forward. And then, so you'd kind of have this bulge, and then they would ease off after that.
Yeah, I think long-term actually would cause a reduction because it would ease up this after-graduation burden. But there's certainly, it would be the belly of the snake. They're swallowing this thing that would flow through the snake, but afterwards it would shrink down to a previous
So that's
size.
interesting. So long-term, you think eliminating the 7-year rule would actually reduce the amount of filings because
Correct.
people would be able to get on with their life quicker.
Well, if you're strapped with this student loan payment, and these are the equivalent of car payments, some of them mortgage payments, that means you have less money to spend on the rest of your life. So you're either going to borrow to maintain a standard of living, or you're going to have a lower standard of living. And we know from a fact that people borrow.
Well, and we know for a fact that the average age of someone who has student loans who's filing a bankruptcy or proposal with us is in their mid-30s.
Right, because 7 years after they graduate.
Right. And so if you were to eliminate that rule and give people who needed the debt relief, and we're talking about the people who weren't able to find a good job, who aren't able to pay it back, then doesn't that also help the economy? Because if you've got this student loan debt, is it not the case that, well, I'm not going to start a business.
Right.
I'm not going to get married as quickly. I'm not going to have kids as quickly.
All of these things that everyone takes for granted get delayed, easily a decade. Or you incur a lot of debt not to delay them.
So it's kind of obvious, I think, that by eliminating that student loan rule, you're giving a whole bunch of people a fresh start and allowing them to.
Now, the short-term politics would be insane because everyone would point at this and say, "Look at how many bankruptcies there were as soon as you changed the rule." That would be expected, it'd be anticipated. But again, what we just told them was, within a year or so, that bulge would be gone. So you've just got to take a slightly longer-term picture, longer-term view of this thing, which most people don't do.
And as I said earlier, you and I have been advocating for this for many, many years.
Well, I guess 11, is that what you said?
Yes. And it's not like the government instantly jumps at whatever we tell them to do and does it immediately. So I think the chances of the 7-year rule being eliminated after the next election in October are pretty slim.
I don't think any of the parties have student loans on their platforms as something that they're pushing.
You're correct, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast today.
To try and raise awareness.
To raise awareness. I mean, we've done a lot of work crunching the numbers to produce these stats so that people can actually see what's happening out there.
Right.
And so perhaps now as a society we can have an informed decision and look at the numbers. Yeah. And so concluding comments, the rule today is inconsistent.
Inconsistent, inequitable, unfair. Use
punitive.
whatever word
Let's
you
use
want.
Punitive.
Punitive's
I think
a good
it's
word.
Also punitive. So two equal people, one person starts a business, one person goes to school. This person gets debt relief, this person doesn't.
Correct.
Got to wait for 7 years. So final comments from you. What I mean, obviously you and I are both in favor of shortening this rule. What do you think's going to happen? What do you think should happen?
I think very little is going to happen, which is sad. Because this is a burden that the younger generation is going to continue to bear because schooling is not getting cheaper. I mean, just that 5% per year, again, it's just going to continue to get higher, get higher, get higher. We have to find a different way to fund education. If we're going to continue to do it with this loan model, then we have to switch to something that is more fair and equitable so that if what you did was a mistake and didn't work, you can get relief so you can start over.
Well, and I think as parents, we have to explain to our children that university should not be an automatic default position.
Right.
I mean, you're a futurologist. You can see the future.
Certainly I can.
So let me ask you this question.
Bankruptcies will increase by 10%
That's right.
year.
Yeah. You actually undershot.
I undershot.
Undershot on that prediction.
I was conservative. Who would have thought that?
So 500 years from now, can you predict what kind of vehicles we'll be driving? No, that's way too far in the future. Who knows?
Right.
But let me ask you this. 500 years from now, do you think we will still use water?
Certainly.
Do you think we will still therefore have a need for plumbers?
Certainly.
It doesn't matter how much technology you come up with. Do you think we'll still use electricity 500 years from now? Probably.
Some form of power.
Yeah. So electricians, all those kind of things.
Yep.
So I think there are a whole lot of great jobs out there that do not require massive student loans to pursue.
And quite frankly, those master tradesmen are making more money than many university graduates.
Absolutely.
They have employees working for them.
Yeah, they got started at the age of 18, or maybe there's some college they go to, they're apprenticing and whatnot. But by the time they're 22 or 23, they're making really good money and they've got no debt
and no opportunity costs. They went straight to the
absolutely.
workforce. Yep.
So I think it's not just looking at the money aspects, which of course is a huge thing, and the rules themselves, but I think how we as society treat education as being, well, you definitely have to go to university as the default. So excellent. Well, Ted, thank you very much. I think that's a good place to end.
You didn't get anywhere near as excited as I get.
Well,
so we'll have to work on this.
I had a tie on today, so that kind of toned me down. We've gone through a lot of numbers today. We didn't make them up. I mean, these are based on a huge amount of research we've done. So if you want to see our source data, you can go to Hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And you can do a search for student debt crisis, and everything we talked about will pop up there, and you can see our full study with all of the details. And as we alluded to, since we have a federal election coming up next month in October, feel free to share this data with the candidates in your area.
Ask questions.
Ask questions. Perhaps we can get the government to finally agree that students should be treated the same as everyone else. As you said, right now, it's time to end this inconsistent and punitive treatment of student loans. That's our show for today. Thanks for listening and watching on YouTube. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. For Ted Michalos, that was Debt Free in 30.